20 years ago, if you wanted to watch your favorite show, you had exactly one option. You waited. Maybe it aired on Thursday at 8 p.m. Maybe you missed it. Maybe you never saw that episode again. Entire evenings were organized around television schedules. Families planned their weeks around a single hour of programming. You watched commercials. You sat through them. You had no choice. Then a company appeared that quietly changed the rules. Today, billions of people watch whatever they want, whenever they want. And television may never recover. But here is the part nobody talks about. The company that did this started by mailing DVDs in red envelopes. For most of the 20th century, television operated like a dictatorship with good PR. The networks decided what you watched. They decided when you watched it. They decided how many commercials interrupted it and how long those commercials ran. And the audience accepted this completely because there was no alternative. If you missed an episode of your favorite show, it was gone. You might catch a rerun in the summer. You might not. Either way, the network held all the power and the viewer held none. Cable television arrived, and people thought it was a revolution. Suddenly, there were dozens of channels instead of 3, but the fundamental relationship never changed. You still watched on their schedule. You still sat through the commercials. You still had no control over what existed or when it appeared. The only thing that changed was the number of options inside the same cage. Then, in 1997, 2 men in California had a different idea. Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph founded Netflix not as a streaming service, not as a content studio, not as the entertainment empire it would become. They founded it as a DVD rental company that delivered movies through the mail. That was the entire idea. You went online, you picked a movie, and a red envelope showed up at your door a few days later. No late fees, no driving to a store, no standing in line behind someone who could not decide between 2 films for 11 minutes. It sounds almost embarrassingly simple now. But at the time, there was a company called Blockbuster with 9,000 locations across the United States, $1 billion in annual revenue, and absolutely no reason to take a small mail-order DVD startup seriously. Blockbuster was so confident in its own dominance that in the year 2000, Netflix offered to sell itself to Blockbuster for $50 million. Blockbuster passed. The executives reportedly laughed in the meeting. Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. In 2010, Netflix was worth billions. There is one Blockbuster location left on Earth. It is in Bend, Oregon, and it has become a tourist attraction. But the DVD business was never the real story. It was just the first move in a much longer game. By the mid-2000s, Hastings had already seen what was coming. Broadband internet was spreading across American homes. Connection speeds were climbing. The idea of streaming video directly to a television, something that had seemed technically impossible just years earlier, was beginning to look like a real possibility. In 2007, Netflix launched its streaming service. At the time, it had about 1,000 titles available. The picture quality was unreliable. Most people in the entertainment industry dismissed it entirely. What those people missed was that Netflix was not selling a product. It was selling a feeling, the feeling of control, the feeling of watching whatever you wanted, the moment you wanted it, with no commercials, no schedules, no waiting. That feeling turned out to be one of the most powerful forces in the history of consumer behavior. And then Netflix did something that nobody in the television industry saw coming. It released an entire season of a show all at once. House of Cards arrived in February 2013. All 13 episodes available simultaneously on a single day. No weekly releases, no cliffhangers designed to make you tune in next Thursday. Just the entire story, sitting there, waiting for you. Netflix had studied its own data and discovered something the traditional networks had never bothered to measure. When people found a show they loved, they did not want to stop. They watched another episode, then another, then another. They stayed up until 2 a.m, finishing a season they had started that afternoon. The networks called it binge watching and treated it like a guilty pleasure. Netflix recognized it as a fundamental truth about human psychology and built an entire business model around it. The autoplay feature, the seamless transition from one episode to the next, the way the next episode begins before you have even decided whether you want to watch it. None of that was accidental. Every single element was engineered to remove the moment of decision, because Netflix understood that the moment of decision is the moment people stop watching. Meanwhile, traditional television was beginning to crack. Cable subscriptions peaked around 2012 and started falling, slowly at first, then faster. The industry invented a term for it: cord cutting. Millions of households were canceling their cable packages and replacing them with streaming services that cost a fraction of the price. The advertising model that had funded American television for 60 years began to erode. Ratings dropped. Ad revenue dropped. Networks that had operated for decades started struggling to justify their own existence. The response from traditional television was almost tragic in its predictability. They made more reality shows. They ran more commercials. They cut budgets. They did everything except the one thing that might have saved them, which was to fundamentally rethink what they were offering and why anyone should still want it. Netflix, meanwhile, was doing something far more aggressive. In 2013, Netflix spent $100 million producing House of Cards before a single viewer had seen a single frame. That number shocked the industry, but it was only the beginning. By 2019, Netflix was spending $15 billion per year on original content. $15 billion. More than any traditional studio, more than any network, more than companies that had been making television for half a century. The logic was ruthless and simple. If Netflix owned the content, it could never be taken away. The studios and networks that had been licensing their libraries to Netflix suddenly realized they had been feeding the machine that was eating them. They started pulling their content back. Netflix responded by making more of its own. Stranger Things, The Crown, Squid Game, Narcos, Ozark, show after show that became global cultural events, watched simultaneously by audiences in dozens of countries, in dozens of languages, on every continent on Earth. And that is when the rest of the industry finally panicked. Disney launched Disney Plus in 2019 and gained 10 million subscribers on its first day. HBO launched HBO Max. Amazon had already been building Prime Video for years. Apple launched Apple TV Plus, Peacock, Paramount Plus, Discovery Plus. Suddenly, every major media company on the planet was trying to build the thing Netflix had already spent 20 years perfecting. They were all chasing a model that Netflix had invented, using content libraries that Netflix had already forced them to build, competing for an audience that Netflix had already trained to expect everything on demand. The streaming wars had begun. And the strange irony was that Netflix had created the very conditions that made those wars inevitable. But here is what all of those competitors missed, and what most people still miss when they talk about Netflix. The real disruption was never about technology. It was never about streaming versus cable, or on-demand versus scheduled programming. The real disruption was psychological. Netflix changed what people believe they deserve from entertainment. Before Netflix, viewers accepted inconvenience as a natural part of watching television. After Netflix, inconvenience became intolerable. Waiting a week between episodes felt like an insult. Sitting through commercials felt like a punishment. Being told you could only watch something at a specific time felt absurd. Netflix did not just change the delivery mechanism for television, it permanently rewired the expectations of an entire global audience. That rewiring cannot be undone. The television industry that existed before 2007 is gone. The business models, the schedules, the advertising structures, the network hierarchies, the entire ecosystem that had operated for 60 years, all of it has been dismantled and rebuilt around a set of expectations that one company created. The networks that survive are the ones that accepted this reality and adapted to it. The ones that did not are disappearing. Quietly, one cancellation at a time. Reed Hastings started a company to mail DVDs in red envelopes. What he actually built was a machine that changed how billions of human beings spend their evenings, how stories are told and consumed, how entire cultures share the same experience at the same moment across every border and every language on Earth. Television did not just change. The relationship between humans and storytelling changed. And the strange, almost uncomfortable truth is that most of us barely noticed it happening. We were too busy watching the next episode.